I certainly don't think we're going to see the resolution of the, quote, trade war, unquote. The issues are much more expansive and deep-seated than the wave of a wand. So whilst you can introduce tariffs with the wave of an executive order signature, it's much harder to unravel the issues once you've put them out there.
Hello, 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。China's Vice Premier He Lifeng, who spent the last 2 days meeting with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in Switzerland, has announced that the talks were in-depth, candid, and constructive, after US President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that the talks were very good. As expected, the Chinese statement offers a little bit more clarity. I'll take a look at the entire release with my special guest, Professor Warwick Powell, who's currently in Beijing. Today, we'll go beyond the propaganda. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boreham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. Yesterday, I reported that US President Donald Trump had announced on Truth Social that he thought the talks between China and the US in Switzerland were very good. And I mentioned that it might be better to wait until today when the Chinese side, who are always cool, calm, and collected, release their thoughts on the meetings. Well, that has now been released, and somewhat surprisingly, China more or less agrees with Trump's overall rating of the talks as very good. Just a quick note before I read the Chinese statement in full. China and the US have agreed to release a joint statement today sometime, so I'll be waiting for that, and I'll share it with you guys as soon as possible. Now, as I predicted, China released the following statement this morning, which I will read in full. And after that, we'll have a quick chat with my special guest, Adjunct Professor Warwick Powell from the Queensland University of Technology, who's also a senior fellow at Beijing's Taihe Institute. Okay, let's read the statement. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng said here on Sunday that the China-US high-level meeting on economic and trade affairs were in-depth, candid, and constructive. He, the Chinese lead person for the China-US Economic and Trade Affairs, made the remarks when briefing the press following the high-level meeting with the US side. The senior Chinese official said the two sides have reached a series of major consensuses, adding that China and the United States have also agreed to establish an economic and trade consultation mechanism. China and the United States, He said, will finalize relevant details as soon as possible and release on Monday a joint statement reached during the talks. He noted that under the current circumstances, the meeting was closely watched by the international community. Through joint efforts of both sides, the talks were fruitful, said He, adding that it is an important step towards resolving differences through equal dialogue and consultation, and has laid the foundation and created conditions for further bridging differences and deepening cooperation. Economic and trade relations between China and the United States are not only of great significance to the two countries, but also have an important impact on the stability and development of the global economy, said He. China is ready to work with the United States to actively implement the consensus reached by the two heads of state during their phone call on January 17, He added. Now, I'll tell you guys the content of that January 17 phone call very shortly. The statement continued, He also called on the two sides to follow a practical attitude for solving problems, carry out candid dialogues and equal consultations, manage differences, explore cooperation potential, extend the list of cooperation list, I'm just reading this verbatim, you guys, and make the pie of cooperation bigger, so as to push the new development in China-US economic and trade relations and inject more certainty and stability into the world economy. Well, a lot of information in there, but at the same time, nothing solid. First, I'll quickly address He Lifeng's comments on the consensus reached between President Xi and then President-elect Trump on January 17. Basically, the two agreed to cooperation, the construction of a strategic communication channel, which evidently hasn't been set up, a commitment to global peace and stability, and respecting each other's core interests, which for the Chinese side also included the US staying out of China's domestic affairs, specifically as it pertains to Taiwan. So, Professor Warwick Powell, firstly, what do you make of the response so far from both sides that the talks were, as Trump called them, very good? And how surprised are you that both sides seem to have somewhat agreed?
Well, I think it's important to unpack the styles of communications from both the American side and the Chinese side. And perhaps try and figure out from there what the actual common ground is. The Americans were, of course, quick to rush out to social media to talk up the outcomes of the discussions and to create some expectations, I guess, that progress was being made. And that is an important piece of communications from an American domestic political point of view. It's probably also important from the American point of view insofar as it has, over the course of the last few weeks, struggled to secure significant agreements with other countries, most of whom have, whilst being willing to entertain discussions, have also been working tirelessly behind the scenes to rebuild or to consolidate existing collaborations with others and to lay the groundwork for a more robust multilateral approach to engaging with the United States. So the United States, of course, was quick out of the gates to try and shape expectations. Interestingly, too, the American officials use more hyperbolic language that talk about, that almost imply that significant breakthroughs and agreements have been reached. And of course, these are matters of interpretation, I guess, and we will know a lot more when the joint statement comes out. So that's the American side, very strong on hyperbole, talk up the sort of marketing side of things, and probably a little bit less on the detail. The Chinese statement, on the other hand, is much more operational. It is more standard in terms of some of the terminology that it uses to describe the nature of the meetings, particularly in terms of how public consumption information about engagements between countries is communicated. So language like candid, constructive, fruitful, productive, they're all words that are carefully chosen to indicate that the parties sat down, they put the sort of heated politics and rhetoric to one side and focused on the nuts and bolts issues in front of them. So that's the candid and fruitful and constructive pieces. The candid pieces, of course, was the parties making it clear to the other side exactly what it is that irked them about what's going on, and we've seen a lot of that already from the Chinese side, explaining their position in relation to the unilateral and capricious tariffs. So, as you read out, there seems to be some agreements on a mechanism to address the issues going forward, and that's probably the most foundational piece of consensus achieved to date. There's actually no outcome per se in terms of the resolution of the dispute and the core issues at stake, but there is now a mechanism that they've agreed to as to how they will go forward to address the issues. And without such a mechanism, of course, it's very hard for parties to engage with each other. So it's a positive step forward, but it's one step in what is likely to be a challenging journey.
Yeah, and I noticed when you're speaking of the words chosen, that what everyone I think wants to know about is tariffs and when the tariff war that's going on at the moment will come to an end. So Trump obviously never mentioned tariffs in his short post on Truth Social, and the longer Chinese statement also avoided that word. So when do you think we might see some movement in those tariff levels?
Well, it could be quite some time off, but I think the interlocutors meeting on the banks of Lake Geneva will have been aware of media reports over the course of the weekend pointing to the cessation of cargo ships leaving the port of Shanghai for North America. There's also been many reports over the course of the last few days about the reduction in cargo shipments to America, to a point where the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles has been publicly expressing deep concerns that American inventories will begin to be impacted within about 5 to 7 weeks. We've also seen major retailer representatives speak directly to the White House, expressing concerns about the impact of tariffs on inventory and ultimately what that will mean for availability of goods and pricing. So I think that there is no doubt that the unfolding of these tariffs since the 2nd of April has, in many regards, caught some people by surprise as far as how quickly they would bite and cut off trade, and ultimately how quickly that would affect the downstream inventory situation in the United States. These days, most businesses hold very short inventory cycles. It's expensive to have stock sitting still, and of course, you're also paying for the privilege of storing stock in warehouses. So enterprises are running much leaner operations to better manage cash flow and their capital. And so, an inventory base of maybe 1.5 to 2 months maximum is all we've got. So it is in the interests of the United States to at least enable some critical goods to flow. Things like back to school packs, mundane day-to-day products. So I'm not talking about dolls, I'm talking about school books and bags and rulers and calculators and pens and pencils and colouring in crayons and those sorts of things, which are bought at the beginning of the school year by American families as their children re-enroll and get ready to go back to school. And the vast majority of these back-to-school kits are actually made in China. And the risk is that school children won't have the things that they need to go back to school, or they will be substantially more expensive. So there are some very practical reasons why there is a need to at least find some solution to the situation.
Now, we're still obviously waiting on that joint statement from the China and the US, which is supposed to be released sometime today. Do you think that statement will offer any more solid plans, or do you anticipate it will just add more fluff?
Look, reading particularly the statements from the Chinese side, which does give us a lot more detail than the doorstop interviews from the American representatives at the meeting, I think we can be confident that there are some agreements on what they've called mechanisms. Put in layperson terms, what's been agreed by the looks of it are ways in which the parties will now go forward to engage each other on the issues. It's likely to include agreed meeting formats, agreements around the representatives who'll be involved, and probably also some agreements around the agendas that will be addressed and the sequence in which those agenda items will be addressed. There will, of course, be agreements as to how agendas may be modified going forward, subject to the discussions as they unfold. So I think we've now got a framework that enables the parties to substantively put the substantial issues on the table and try to work through them one by one. So that's what I would expect to see. I certainly don't think we're going to see the resolution of the, quote, trade war, unquote. The issues are much more expansive and deep-seated than the wave of a wand. So whilst you can introduce tariffs with the wave of an executive order signature, it's much harder to unravel the issues once you've put them out there. In Australia, we often say it's very difficult to unscramble the egg once you've beaten it up. And I think this is one of those circumstances where it's going to take a lot of effort because there's a lot of detail involved. And let's be frank, it's not just trade that's going to be at issue now. There are many other issues on the table between the China-America relationship, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of those issues became part of a much broader conversation about what the world looks like over the next so many decades on the basis of agreements that may or may not be reached over the next year or so.
Yeah, last question, and it's a bit of a long shot, but I do want to get your opinion while you're here. The Chinese statement hinted at extended cooperation between China and the US. I think the wording was something about making the pie of cooperation bigger. Do you think there's any chance that might include the US finally embracing Chinese EVs, perhaps maybe removing that 100% tariff, or even cooperating with the Chinese, maybe by building Chinese cars in US factories?
Well, as you know, and as many of your viewers no doubt know, China's framework has always emphasised what they call win-win. And the only way you can have win-win is when the pie gets bigger. Otherwise, you have a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another person's loss. So this is an important conceptual shift, if you will, that seeks to emphasise the possibilities that by working together, the pie actually gets bigger. This isn't just a dispute about who gets to carve up the pie and who gets which parts. That's the wrong way of approaching these cross-border economic collaboration questions. The broader and more strategic issue is, how does the pie get made bigger? And then it's up to the individual nation states as to how they share the benefits of a growing pie with their industries and their households and populations at large. So, as I mentioned earlier, I do think that there is the possibility of a much wider range of issues now starting to play a role in these discussions, these bilateral discussions. They will shape the conversation in ways that will push the agenda beyond questions of tariffs and trade per se into much deeper issues around economic collaboration. And that means around research and development. It means investment. Whether or not Trump, for instance, talked during the campaign of being open to Chinese EV manufacturers establishing factories in America. Those issues may well be back on the agenda, and they are complex issues. These aren't, again, things that you can just wish into existence overnight. From the Chinese side, there will be a whole range of issues around medium to long-term risks, assurances that Chinese investment will be treated fairly, won't be subject to punitive measures imposed capriciously. Let's not forget that the political environment on Capitol Hill in the United States is bipartisanly hostile towards China, where China is frequently described as America's greatest threat and adversary. So all of those broader background circumstances will shape the ways in which the Chinese side will approach these issues, and they will approach them, I think, with an open mind, but also with deep caution in their heart.
Very interesting. Professor Warwick Powell, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure to be with you, Andy.
And on that note, that will be it for today, guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so do let me know down below. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.